Chapter 15 of Tom's New Master and Various Other Matters. Since the thread of our humble hero's life has now become interwoven with that of higher ones, it is necessary to give some brief introduction to him. Augustine St. Clair was the son of a wealthy planter of Louisiana. The family had its origin in Canada. Of two brothers very similar in temperament and character, one had settled on a flourishing farm in Vermont, and the other became an opulent planter in Louisiana. The mother of Augustine was a Huguenot French lady whose family had emigrated to Louisiana during the days of its earlier settlement. Augustine and other brother were the only children of their parents. Having inherited from his mother an exceedingly delicacy of constitution, he was at the instance of physicians during many years of his boyhood sent to the care of his uncle in Vermont, in order that his constitution might be strengthened by the cold of a more bracing climate. In childhood he was remarkable for an extreme and marked sensitiveness of character, more akin to the softness of women than ordinary hardness of his own sex. Time, however, overgrew this softness with the rough bark of manhood, and but few knew how living and fresh it still lay at the core. His talents were of a very first order, although his mind showed a preference always to the ideal and the aesthetic, and there was about him that repugnance to the actual busyness of life which is the common result of this balance of the faculties. Soon after the completion of his college course, his whole nature was kindled into one intense and passionate effervescence of romantic passion. His hour came, the hour that comes only once. His star rose in the horizon, that star that rises so often in vain to be remembered only as a thing of dreams, and arose for him in vain. To drop the figure he saw in one the love of high-minded and beautiful women, in one of the northern states, and they were affianced. He returned south to make arrangements for their marriage, when most unexpectedly his letters were returned to him by mail, with a short note from her guardian, stating to him that ere this reached him the lady would be the wife of another. Stung to madness, he vainly hoped, as many another has done, to fling the whole thing from his heart by one desperate effort. Too proud to supplicate or seek explanation, he threw himself at once into a whirl of fashionable society, and in a fortnight from the time of fatal letter was the accepted lover of a reign belle of the season, and as soon as arrangements could be made, he became the husband of a fine figure, a pair of bright dark eyes, and $100,000, and of course everybody thought him a happy fellow. The married couple were enjoying their honeymoon, and entertaining a brilliant circle of friends in their splendid villa, near Lake Pontchartrain, where one day a letter was brought to him in that well-remembered writing. It was handed to him while he was in full tide of gray and successful conversation. In a whole room full of company, he turned deadly pale when he saw the writing, but still preserved his composure, and finished a playful warfare of badinage which he was at the moment carrying on with a lady opposite, and a short time after was missed from the circle. In his room alone he opened and read the letter, now worse than idle and useless to be read. It was from her, giving a long account of a persecution to which she had been exposed to her guardian's family, to lead her to unite herself with her son, and she related how for a long time his letters had ceased to arrive, how she had written time and time again till she became weary and doubtful, how her health had failed under her anxieties, and how at last she had discovered the whole fraud which had been practiced on them both. The letter ended with expressions of hope and thankfulness, and professions of undying affection which were more bitter than death to the unhappy young man. He wrote to her immediately, "I have received yours, but too late. I believe all I am heard. I was desperate. I am married, and all is over. Only forget, it is all that remains for either of us." And thus ended the whole romance and idea of life for Augustine St. Clair. But the real remained, the real like the flat, bare, oozy, tide mud, when the blue sparkling wave with all its company of gliding boats and white-winged ships, its music of oars and chiming waters had gone down, and there it lies flat, slimy, bare, exceedingly real. Of course, in a novel, people's hearts break and they die, and that is the end of it. In a story, this is very convenient. But in real life, we do not die when all makes life bright dies to us. There is a more busy and important round of eating, drinking, dressing, walking, visiting, buying, selling, talking, reading, and all that makes up what is commonly called living. Yet to be gone through, this yet remained to Augustine, had his wife been a whole woman, she might yet have done something as woman can to mend the broken threads of life, and weave again into a tissue of brightness. But Mary St. Clair could not even see that they had been broken. As before stated, she consisted of a fine figure, a pair of splendid eyes, and $100,000. And none of these items were precisely the ones to minister to a mind diseased. When Augustine, pale as death, was found lying on the sofa and pleading sudden sick headache as the cause of his distress, she recommended to him the smell of hartshorn. And when the paleness and headache came on week after week, she only said that she never thought of Mr. St. Clair was sickly, but it seems he was very liable to sick headaches. That it was a very unfortunate thing for her, because he didn't enjoy going into company with her, and it seemed odd to go so much alone, when they were just married. Augustine was glad in his heart that he had married so undiscerning a woman, but as the glosses and subtleties of a honeymoon wore away, he discovered what a beautiful young woman who had lived all her life to be caressed and waited on might prove quite a hard mistress in domestic life. Marie never had possessed such capability of affection or much sensibility, and the little that she had been merged into a most intense and unconscious selfishness, a selfishness of a more hopeless form, its quiet obtuseness, its utter ignorance of any claims but her own. From her infancy she had been surrounded with servants who lived only to study her caprices. The idea that they had either feelings or rights had never dawned upon her, even in distant perspective. Her father, whose only child she had been, had never denied her anything that lay within the compass of human possibility. And when she entered life beautiful, accomplished, and an heiress, she had of course all the eligible and non-eligible of the other sex citing at her feet. She had no doubt that Augustine was a most fortunate man in having abstained her. It is a great mistake to suppose that a woman with no heart will be an easy creditor in the exchange of affection. There is not on earth a more merciless exactor of love from others than a thoughtfully selfish woman, and the more unlovely she grows, the more jealous and scrupulous she exacts love to the uttermost farthing. When therefore St. Clair began to drop off those gallantries and small attentions which flowed at first through the habitude of courtship, he found his sultana no way ready to resign her slave. There were abundance of tears, poutings, and small tempests. There were discontents, pinnings, upbraidings. St. Clair was a good-natured and self-indulgent, and sought to buy off the presents and flatteries, and when Mary became mother to a beautiful daughter, he really felt awakened for a time to do something like tenderness. St. Clair's mother had been a woman of uncommon elevation and purity of character, and he gave to his child his mother's name, fondly fancying that she would prove a reproduction of her image. The thing had been remarked with petulant jealousy by his wife, and she regarded her husband's absorbing devotion to the child with suspicion and dislike. All that was given to her seemed so much taken from herself. From the time of the birth of this child, her health gradually sunk. A life of constant inaction, bodily and mentally, the friction of ceaselessly anew, and discontent, united to the ordinary weakness which attended the period of maternity, in course of a few years changed the blooming young belle into a yellow-faded, sickly woman, whose time was divided among a variety of fanciful diseases, and who considered herself in every sense the most ill-used and suffering person in existence. There was no end of her various complaints, but her principal forte appeared to lie in sick headache, which sometimes would confine her to her room 3 days out of 6. As of course all family arrangements fell into the hands of servants, St. Clair found his menage anything but comfortable. His only daughter was exceedingly delicate, and he feared that, with no one to look after her and attend to her, her health and life might yet fall a sacrifice to her mother's inefficiency. He had taken her with him on a tour to Vermont, and had persuaded his cousin Miss Ophelia St. Clair to return with him to southern residence, and they are now returning on his boat, where we have introduced them to our readers. And now, while the distant domes and spires of New Orleans rise to our view, there is yet time for an introduction to Miss Ophelia. Whoever has traveled in the New England states will remember in some cool village the large farmhouse, with its clean-swept grassy yard, shaded by the dense and massive foliage of a sugar maple. Remember the air of order and stillness, of perpetuity and unchanging repose that seemed to breathe over the whole place. Nothing lost or out of order, not a picket loose in a fence, not a particle of litter in the turfy yard, with its clumps of lilac bushes growing up under the windows. Within, he will remember wide, clean rooms where nothing ever seems to be done or going to be done, where everything is once and forever rigidly in place, and where all household arrangements move with the punctual exactness of the old clock in the corner. In the family keeping-room, as it is termed, he will remember the staid, respectable old bookcase with its glass doors, where Rollin's History, Milton's Paradise Lost, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and Scott's Family Bible stand side by side in decorous order with multitudes of other books, equally solemn and respectable. There are no servants in the house, but the lady in the snowy cap with spectacles who sits sewing every afternoon among her daughters, as if nothing ever had been done, or to be done. She and her girls in some long-forgotten forepart of a day did up the work, and for the rest of the time, probably at all hours, when you would see them, it is done up. The old kitchen floor never seems stained or spotted. The tables, the chairs, and the various cooking utensils never seem deranged or disordered, though 3 and sometimes 4 meals a day are got there. Though the family washing and ironing is there performed, and though pounds of butter and cheese are in some silent and mysterious manner there brought into existence. The Ancient History, 10 volumes, 1730 to 1738, by the French historian Charles Rollins, 1661 to 1741. On such a farm and such a house and family, Miss Ophelia had spent a quiet existence of some 45 years, when her cousin invited her to visit his southern mansion. The eldest of a large family, she was still considered by her father and mother as one of the children, and the proposal that she would go to Orleans was a most momentous one to the family circle. The old gray-headed father took down Morse's atlas out of bookcase, and looked out the exact latitude and longitude, and read Flint's travels in the south and west, to make up his own mind as to the nature of the country. The Serographic Atlas of the United States, by Sidney Edwards, son of a geographer, Jedediah Morse, and father of a painter-inventor, Samuel F. B. Morse. The good mother inquired anxiously if Orleans wasn't an awful wicked place, saying that it seemed to her most equal to going to Sandwich Islands or anywhere among the heathen. It was known at the minister, and at the doctor's, and at Miss Peabody's milliner's shop, that Ophelia St. Clair was talking about going away down to Orleans with her cousin, and of course the whole village could do no less than help this very important process of talking about the matter. The minister, who inclined strongly to abolitionist views, was quite doubtful whether such a step might not tend somewhat to encourage the Southerners in holding on to their slaves, while the doctor, who was a stanch colonizationist, inclined to the opinion that Miss Ophelia ought to go to show the Orleans people that we don't think hardly of them after all. He was of opinion, in fact, that Southern people needed encouraging. When, however, the fact that she had resolved to go was fully before the public mind, she was solemnly invited out to tea by all her friends and neighbors for the space of a fortnight, and her prospect and plans duly canvassed and inquired into. Miss Moseley, who came into the house to help to do dressmaking, acquired daily accessions of importance from the developments with regard to Miss Ophelia's wardrobe, which she had been enabled to make. It was credibly ascertained that Squire Sinclair, as his name was commonly contracted in the neighborhood, had counted out $50 and given them to Miss Ophelia, and told her to buy any clothes she thought best, and that 2 new silk dresses and a bonnet had been sent from Boston. As to the propriety of this extraordinary outlay, the public mind was divided, some affirming that it was well enough, all things considered, for once in one's life, and others stoutly affirming that the money had better have been sent to the missionaries, but all parties agreed that there had been no such parcel seen in those parts as been sent on from New York, and that she had one silk dress that might fairly be trusted to stand alone, whatever might be said of its mistress. There were credible rumors also of a hem-stitched pocket handkerchief, and report even went so far as to state that Miss Ophelia had one pocket handkerchief with lace all around it. It was even added that it was worked in the corners, but this latter point was never satisfactorily ascertained, and remains in fact unsettled to this day. Miss Ophelia, as you now behold her, stands before you in a very shining brown linen traveling dress, tall, square-formed, and angular. Her face was thin, and rather sharp in its outlines, the lips compressed like those of a person who is in the habit of making up her mind definitely on all subjects, while the keen dark eyes had a peculiarly searching, advised moment, and traveled over everything as if they were looking for something to take care of. All her movements were sharp, decided, and energetic, and though she was never much of a talker, her words were remarkably direct and to the purpose when she did speak. In her habits she was a living personification of order, method, and exactness. In punctuality she was as inevitable as a clock, and as inexorable as a railroad engine. She held in most decided contempt and abomination anything of a contrary character. The great sin of sins in her eyes, the sum of all evils, was expressed by one very common and important word in her vocabulary: shiftlessness. Her finale and ultimatum of contempt consisted in a very emphatic pronunciation of the word shiftless, and by this she characterized all modes of procedure which had not a direct and inevitable relation to accomplishment of some purpose but definitely had in mind. People who did nothing, or did not know exactly what they were going to do, or who did not make the most direct way to accomplish what they set their hands to, were objects of her entire contempt, a contempt shown less frequent by anything she said than by a kind of stony grimness, as if she scorned to say something about the matter. As to mental cultivation, she had a clear, strong, active mind, was well and thoroughly read in history and the older English classics, and thought with great strength with certain narrow limits. Her theological tenets were all made up, labeled in most positive and distinct forms, and put by like the bundles in her patch trunk. There were just so many of them, and there were never to be any more. So also here her ideas with regard to most matters of practical life, such as housekeeping in all its branches, and the various political relations of her native village. And underlying all deeper than anything else, higher and broader, lay the strongest principle of her being, conscientiousness. Nowhere in conscience so dominant and all-absorbing as with New England women. It is the granite formation which lies deepest and rises out even to tops of the highest mountains. Miss Ophelia was the absolute bond-slave of the ought. Once make her certain that the path of duty, as she commonly phrased it, lay in any given direction, and fire and water could not keep her from it. She would walk straight down into a well or up to a loaded cannon's mouth if she were only quite sure that where the path lay. Her standard of right was so high, so all-embracing, so minute, and making so few concessions to human frailty, that though she strove with heroic ardor to reach it, she never actually did so, and of course was burdened with a constant and often harassing sense of deficiency. This gave a severe and somewhat gloomy cast to her religious character. But how in the world can Miss Ophelia get along with Augustine St. Clair, gay, easy, unpunctual, unpractical, skeptical, in short, walking with impudent and nonchalant freedom over every one of her most cherished habits and opinions? To tell the truth, then, Miss Ophelia loved him. When a boy, it had been hers to teach him his catechism, mend his clothes, comb his hair, and bring him up generally in the way he should go. And her heart having a warm side to it, Augustine had, as he usually did with most people, monopolized a large share of it for himself, and therefore was that he succeeded very easily in persuading her that the path of duty lay in the direction of New Orleans, that she must go with him to take care of Ava and keep everything from going to wreck and ruin during the frequent illness of his wife. The idea of a house without anybody to take care of it went to her heart, and she loved the lovely little girl as few could help doing. And though she regarded Augustine as very much of a heathen, yet she loved him, laughed at his jokes, and forbore with his failings, to an extent which those who knew him thought perfectly incredible. But what more or others is to be known of Miss Ophelia, our reader must discover by a personal acquaintance. There she is, sitting now in her stateroom, surrounded by a mixed multitude of little and big carpet bags, boxes, baskets, each containing some separate responsibility, which she is tying, binding up, packing, or fastening with a face of great earnestness. Now, Ava, have you kept count of your things? Of course you haven't. Children never do. There's the spotted carpet bag and the little blue bandbox with your blue bonnet. That's two, then the India rubber satchel is three. And my tape and needle box is four, and my bandbox five. And my collar box and that little hair trunk seven. What have you done with your sunshade? Give it to me. And let me put a paper round it and tie it to my umbrella with my shade. There now. Why, Auntie, we haven't only going up home. What is the use? To keep it nice, child. People must take care of their things, if they ever mean to have anything. And now, Ava, is your thimble put up? Really, Auntie, I don't know. Well, never mind. I'll look over your box. Thimble, wax, two spools, scissor, knife, tape, needle. All right. Put it in there. What did you ever do, child, when you were coming on with only your papa? I should have thought you'd lost everything you had. Well, Auntie, I did lose a great many, and then when he stopped anywhere, Papa would buy some more of whatever it was. Mercy on us, child, what a way! It was a very easy way, Auntie, said Ava. It's a dreadful shiftless one, said Auntie. Why, Auntie, what'll you do now, said Ava. That trunk is too full to be shut down. It must shut down, said Auntie, with the air of a general, as she squeezed the things in and sprung upon the lid. Still a little gap remained about the mouth of the trunk. Get up here, Ava, said Miss Ophelia, courageously. What has been done can be done again. This trunk has got to be shut and locked. There are no two ways about it. And the trunk, intimidated doubtless by this resolute statement, gave in. The hasp snapped sharply in its hole, and Miss Ophelia turned the key and pocketed it in triumph. Now we are ready. Where's your papa? I think it's time this baggage was set out. Do look out, Ava, and see if you see your papa. Oh, yes, he's down the other end of a gentleman's cabin eating an orange. He can't know you near we are coming, said Auntie. Hadn't you better run and speak to him? Papa never is in a hurry about anything, said Ava. And we haven't come to the landing. Do step on the guards, Auntie. Look, there's our house up this street. The boat now began, with heavy groans like some vast tired monster, to prepare to push up among the multiplied steamers at the levee. Ava joyously pointed out the various spires, domes, and waymarks, by which she recognized her native city. Yes, yes, dear, very fine, said Miss Ophelia. But mercy on us, the boat has stopped. Where is your father? And now ensued the usual turmoil of landing waiters, running 20 ways at once, men tugging trunks, carpet bags, boxes, women anxiously calling to their children, and everybody crowding in a dense mass to plank towards the landing. Miss Ophelia seated herself resolutely on the lately vanquished trunk, and marshalling all her goods and chattels in fine military order, seemed resolute to defend them to the last. "Shall I take your trunk, ma'am? Shall I take your baggage? Let me tend to your baggage, missus." "Shan't I carry out these yet, your missus?" rained down upon her unheeded. She sat with grim determination, upright as a darning needle stuck in a board, holding on her bundle of umbrella and parcels, and replying with determination that was enough to strike dismay even into a hackman, wondering to Ava in each interval what upon earth her papa could be thinking of. He couldn't have fallen over now, but something must have happened, and just as he had begun to work herself into a real distress, he came up. With his usually careless motion, and giving Ava a quarter of the orange he was eating, said, "Well, Cousin Vermont, I suppose you are all ready." "I've been ready, waiting nearly an hour," said Ophelia. "I began to be really concerned about you." "That's a clever fellow, now," said he. "Well, the carriage is waiting and the crowd are now off, so that one can walk out in a decent and Christian manner, and not be pushed and shoved here." He added to a driver who stood behind him, "Take these things." "I'll go and see to his putting them in," said Miss Ophelia. "Oh, pshaw, cousin, what's the use?" said St. Clair. "Well, at any rate, I'll carry this and this and this," said Miss Ophelia, singling out 3 boxes and a small carpet bag. "My dear Miss Vermont, positively you mustn't come to the Green Mountains over us that way. You must stop at least a piece of a Southern principle, and not walk out under all that load. They'll take you for a waiting maid. Give them to his fellow. He'll put them down as if they were eggs now." Miss Ophelia looked despairingly as her cousin took all her treasures from her, and rejoiced to find herself once more in a carriage with them in a state of preservation. "Where's Tom?" said Ava. "Oh, he's on the outside. Pussy, I'm going to take Tom up to mother for a peace offering, to make up for that drunken fellow that upset the carriage." "Oh, Tom will make a splendid driver, I know," said Ava. "He'll never get drunk." The carriage stopped in front of an ancient mansion, built in that odd mixture of Spanish and French style which there are specimens in some part of New Orleans. It was built in the Moorish fashion, a square building enclosing a courtyard, into which the carriage drove through an arched gateway. The court and the inside had evidently been arranged to gratify a picturesque and voluptuous ideality. Wide galleries ran all around the 4 sides, whose Moorish arches, slender pillars, and arabesque ornaments carried the mind back, as in a dream, to the reign of Oriental romance in Spain. In the middle of the court a fountain threw high its silvery water, falling in a never-ceasing spray in a marble basin, fringed with a deep border of fragrant violets. The water in the fountain, pellucid as crystal, was alive with myriads of gold and silver fishes, twinkling and darting through it like so many living jewels. Around the fountain ran a walk paved with a mosaic of pebbles laid in various fanciful patterns, and this again was surrounded by turf smooth as green velvet, while a carriage drive enclosed the whole. 2 large orange trees, now fragrant with blossoms, threw a delicious shade, and ranged in a circle round upon the turf were marble vases of arabesque sculptures, containing the choicest flowering plants of the tropics. Huge pomegranate trees with their glossy leaves and flame-colored flowers, dark-leaved Arabian jessamines with their silvery stars, geraniums, luxuriant roses bending beneath their heavy abundance of flowers, golden jessamines, lemon-scented verbenum, all united their bloom and fragrance, while here our mythic old aloe with its strange massive leaves sat looking like some old enchanter sitting in weird grandeur among the more perishable bloom and fragrance around it. The galleries that surrounded the court were festooned with a curtain of some kind of Moorish stuff, and could be drawn down at pleasure, to exclude the beams of the sun. On the whole, the appearance of the place was luxurious and romantic. As the carriage drove in, Ava seemed like a bird ready to burst from a cage, with the wild eagerness of her delight. "Oh, isn't it beautiful, lovely? My own "Dear darling home," she said to Miss Ophelia. "Isn't it beautiful?" "'Tis a pretty place," said Miss Ophelia as she alighted, "though it looks rather old and heathenish to me." Tom got down from the carriage and looked about with an air of calm, still enjoyment. The Negro, it must be remembered, is exotic of the most gorgeous and superb countries of the world, and he has, deep in his heart, a passion for all that is splendid, rich, and fanciful. A passion which, rudely indulged by an untrained taste, draws on them the ridicule of the colder and more correct white race. St. Clair, who was in heart a poetical voluptuary, smiled as Miss Ophelia made her remark on his premise, and turning to Tom, who was standing looking round, his beaming black face perfectly radiant with admiration, he said, "Tom, my boy, this seems to suit you." "Yes, master, it looks about the right thing," said Tom. All this passed in a moment, while trunks were being hustled off, hackmen paid, and while a crowd of all ages and sizes, men, women, and children came running through the galleries, both above and below, to see master come in. Foremost among them was a highly dressed young mulatto man, evidently a very distinct personage, attired in the ultra extreme of the mode, and gracefully waving a scented cambric handkerchief in his hand. This personage had been exerting himself with great alacrity in driving all the flock of domestics to the other end of the veranda. "Back, all of you! I am ashamed of you," he said, in a tone of authority. "Would you intrude on master's domestic relations in the first hour of his return?" All looked abashed at their elegant speech, delivered with quite an air, and stood huddled together at a respectful distance, except two stout porters, who came up and began conveying away the baggage. Owing to Mr. Adolph's systematic arrangements, when St. Clair turned round from paying the hackman, there was nobody in view but Mr. Adolph himself, conspicuous in satin vest, gold guard chain, and white pants, and bowing with inexpressible grace and suavity. "Ah, Adolphe, is it you?" said his master, offering his hand to him. "How are you, boy?" While Adolphe poured forth with great fluency an extempore speech which he had been preparing with great care for a fortnight before. "Well, well," said St. Clair, passing on with his usual air of negligent drollery. "That very well got up, Adolphe. See that the baggage is well bestowed. I'll come to the people in a minute." And so saying, he led Miss Ophelia to a large parlor that opened on a veranda. While this had been passing, Ava had flown like a bird through the porch and parlor to a poor boudoir opening likewise on the veranda. While this had been passing, Ava had flown like a bird through the porch and parlor to a little border opening likewise on the veranda. A tall, dark-eyed, sallow woman half rose from a couch on which she was reclining. "Mamma!" said Ava in a sort of rapture, throwing herself on her neck and embracing her over and over again. "That'll do. Take care, child. Don't make my head ache," said the mother after she had languidly kissed her. St. Clair came in, embraced his wife in true orthodox husbandly fashion, and presented to her his cousin. Mary lifted her large eyes on her cousin with an air of some curiosity, and received her with languid politeness. A crowd of servants now pressed to the entry door, and among them a middle-aged mulatto woman of very respectable appearance stood foremost in a tremor of expectation and joy at the door. "Oh, there's Mommy," said Ava as she flew across the room, and throwing herself into her arms, she kissed her repeatedly. This woman did not tell her that she made her head ache, but on the contrary she hugged her, and laughed and cried, till her sanity was a thing to be doubted of, and when released from her, Ava flew from one to another, shaking hands and kissing in a way that Miss Ophelia afterwards declared fairly turned her stomach. "Well," said Miss Ophelia, "you Southern children can do something that couldn't." "What now, pray?" said St. Clair. "Well, I want to be kind to everybody, and I wouldn't have anything hurt, but as to kissing—" "Slaves," said St. Clair, "that you're not up to, hey?" "Yes, that's it. How can she?" St. Clair laughed as she went into the passage. "Oh la, here, what's to pay out here? Here you are. Oh, Mammy, Jimmy, Polly, Sukey, glad to see. Master, he said, as he went shaking hands from one to another. Look out for the babies, he added as he stumbled over a sooty little urchin who was crawling upon all fours. If I step upon anybody, let him mention it. There was an abundance of laughing and blessing, Master, as St. Clair distributed small pieces of change among them. Come now, take yourselves off like good boys and girls, he said, and the whole assemblage, dark and light, disappeared through a door into a large veranda, followed by Ava, who carried a large satchel, which she had been filling with apples, nuts, candy, ribbons, laces, and toys of every description, during her whole homeward journey. As St. Clair turned to go back, his eye fell upon Tom, who was standing uneasily, shifting from one foot to the other, while Adolphe stood negligently leaning against the banisters, examining Tom through an operation glass with an air that would have done credit to any dandy living. "Pah, you puppies," said his master, striking down the opera glass. "Is that the way you treat your company? Seems to me, Dolph," he added, laying his finger on the elegant figured satin vest that Adolphe was sporting, "seems to me that's my vest. Oh, master, this vest all stained with wine. Of course a gentleman in master's standing never wears a vest like this. I understood I was to take it. It does for a poor slave fellow like me." And Adolphe tossed his head and passed his finger through his scented hair with a grace. "So that's it, is it?" said St. Clair carelessly. "Well, here, I'm going to show this Tom to his mistress, and then you take him to the kitchen. And mind you, don't put on any of your airs to him. He's worth two such puppies as you." "Master always will have his joke," said Adolphe, laughing. "I'm delighted to see master in such spirits." "Here, Tom," said St. Clair, beckoning. Tom entered the room. He looked wistfully on the velvet carpets and the before unimagined splendors of mirrors, pictures, statues, and curtains had the Queen of Sheba before Solomon. There was no more spirit in him. He looked afraid even to set his feet down. "See here, Marie," said St. Clair to his wife, "I've bought you a coachman, at last to order. I tell you he's a regular hearse for blackness and sobriety, and will drive you like a funeral, if you want. Open your eyes now and look at him. Now don't say I never think about you when I'm gone." Marie opened her eyes and fixed them on Tom without rising. "I know he'll get drunk," she said. "No, he's warranted a pious and sober article." "Well, I hope he may turn out well," said the lady. "It's more than I expect, though." "Dolph," said St. Clair, "show Tom downstairs, and mind yourself," he added. "Remember what I told you." Adolphe tripped gracefully forward, and Tom with lumbering tread went after. "He's a perfect behemoth," said Marie. "Come now, Marie," said St. Clair, seating himself on a stool beside her sofa. "Be gracious and say something pretty to a fellow." "You've been gone for a fortnight beyond the time," said the lady, pouting. "Well, you know I wrote you the reason." "Such a short, cold letter," said the lady. "Dear me, the mail was just going, and it had to be that or nothing." "That's just the way always," said the lady. "Always something to make your journeys long and letters short. See here now," he added, drawing an elegant velvet case out of his pocket and opening it. "Here's a present I got for you in New York." It was a daguerreotype, clear and soft as an engraving, representing Ava and her father sitting hand in hand. Marie looked at it with a dissatisfied air. "What made you sit in such an awkward position?" she said. "Well, the position may be a matter of opinion, but what do you think of the likeness? If you don't think anything of my opinion in one case, I suppose you wouldn't in another," said the lady, shutting the daguerreotype. "Hang the woman," said St. Clair mentally, but aloud he added, "Come now, Marie, what do you think of the likeness? Don't be nonsensical now." "It's very inconsiderate of you, St. Clair," said the lady, "to insist on my talking and looking at things. You know I've been lying all day with a sick headache, and there's been such a tumult made ever since you came, I'm half dead." "You're subject to the sick headache, ma'am," said Miss Ophelia, suddenly rising from the depths of a large armchair, where she sat quietly taking an inventory of the furniture and calculating its expense. "Yes, I'm a perfect martyr to it," said the lady. "Juniper berry tea is good for sick headaches," said Miss Ophelia. "At least August Deacon Abraham Perry's wife used to say so, and she was a great nurse. I'll have the first juniper berries that get ripe in our garden by the lake brought in for that special purpose," said St. Clair, gravely pulling the bell as he did so. "Meanwhile, cousin, you must be wanting to retire to your apartment and refresh yourself a little after your journey. Dolph," he added, "tell Mommy to come here." The decent mulatto woman whom Emma had caressed so rapturously soon entered. She was dressed neatly with a high red and yellow turban on her head, the recent gift of Ava, and which the child had been arranging on her head. "Mommy," said St. Clair, "I put this lady under your care. She is tired and wants to rest. Take her to her chamber, and be sure she is made comfortable." And Miss Ophelia disappeared in the rear of Mammy.